What's up, everyone? So today I wanted to come at you with a slightly different video, not quite what I usually do, but I wanted to specifically talk about a series that I completed this month while I was reading, which I'm really excited about, this month being May, not quite June. But I did have the opportunity to finally sit down and really focus on finishing the Bridgerton series. And so I was able to finish the rest of the series, book 2 through 8. And I have to say, I thoroughly enjoy the series. But the added benefit to this particular video is I also have clips for you guys from none other than the beautiful, most wondrous, most brilliant author ever, Miss Julia Quinn. We were very, very lucky to have Miss Julia Quinn come to our city recently, and she held a talk in the middle of the Orange County Library. Pardon me. And she was just a pleasure to listen to. She's so sweet. She's so downhearted, down to earth, and she's like just wonderful to work with. In fact, and just as a side note, she had originally told the team that was organizing the event that she would only sign one book per person. It just so happened that I had invested in the Illumicrate special edition novels, as many of you may have already known. And she was so kind. She saw my books and she was like, absolutely, I will sign all of them. I happened to go with a friend as well who did not actually have any books with her at the time. And so Julia Quinn was even sweet enough to personalize one of my editions, which was The Duke and I. And I have to say, overall, thoroughly enjoyed the series. I think it was also really pleasant just speaking to Julia herself and getting a chance to see her interview. And I do have clips of that as well, which I'll be adding to this video. So I do hope you guys enjoy that. But just wanted to touch on all the different books. So in order, obviously we have The Duke and I, which is the first book in the series, which has to do with Daphne and the Duke Simon. It was absolutely a wonderful book. It was particularly entertaining because the male main character in that novel had a lot of personal difficulties and personal sentiments about his upbringing and his father and his relationship with him that he had to overcome in order to reach a point where he felt close enough to allow Daphne into his personal life. And so it was really enjoyable watching that character's development and growth. Outside of that, obviously, the next book up would have been Antony's book. Now, what I will say is the very first book, The Duke and I actually read back in February. So if you watched my February book wrap up, I had kind of commented on how much I enjoyed that novel. The next book in the series is The Viscount Who Loved Me. And I have to say, this book was absolutely wonderful. I gave this a solid 3.5, 4 stars actually. And I loved it because I really loved the enemies to lovers vibe in this book. And I think Kate's character, who is the main female lead, as well as Antony, who was the elder Bridgerton brother in this novel, was very enjoyable. And again, these are the special editions from Illumicrate. So you can see that on the spine, it has all the different characters on the spine so that it makes up the Bridgerton house. And then it has these beautiful etchings on the book. So this one does have the bee, which is a unique component to this book. So every book has something unique to it. So I really enjoyed this book. Then next up, we had An Offer from a Gentleman, which is the story of Benedict. So Benedict is the second brother. And again, you have the masquerade mask, which is very special to their story, his story and Sophie's story. And then again, you have the front of the cover with him in the background in the Bridgerton home, which is also wonderful. And like I mentioned, Miss Julia was absolutely amazing and she signed all the books for me, which I really enjoyed. But this book was like a solid 3 stars for me. It was basically a Cinderella retelling with a twist, which I did enjoy. And I do think anyone who's into the Bridgerton series will enjoy this. I know that as of right now on the Netflix show, they decided to skip Benedict's story, but I do believe they're going to come back to it, hopefully. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. Next up in the series, we have a couple of my favorite characters coming up. The first one being Colin Bridgerton, who is the third brother in the Bridgerton family, and Penelope Featherington. This one was my absolute favorite. We also have to admire the fact that it happens to be the green book, green being my favorite color, so I did really enjoy that as well. And you can see Colin Bridgerton there in the house. and the beautiful, beautiful feather. Now, what I do have to say about this book is it's very enjoyable. It definitely ties a lot of aspects of the Bridgerton series together. And I think it was just really beautiful, not only hearing the love story between Penelope and Colin, but also getting to see them evolve as characters and as individuals as well. The next book in the series was Eloise's story, Eloise being one of my favorite female character leads in the series, and her story is, of course, to Sir Philip with love. This starts off with a bunch of letters being written and sent out, and again, we have that filigree in the metallic shade on this lovely, lovely version of Bridgerton. You have Miss Eloise Bridgerton standing in the window, and I just adored this book. I think what was particularly special to me about this book was also not just the relationship between Eloise and Philip, but also the two children in this book, as well as seeing the relationship between Eloise and her elder brothers. So this was just a really, really fun read for me. I would say in the Bridgerton series, Eloise's story and Penelope's stories were probably my favorite. So I really thoroughly enjoyed this one. Next up, of course, we have the Bridgerton that's spoken about the least, in my personal opinion, which is Miss Francesca. Now, Francesca's story is unique when he was wicked. And I think this book was particularly special to me as well, just because of the fact that we kind of got to see a woman go through a period in her life where she follows everything she's supposed to follow, and she finds herself widowed and trying to find her way out of mourning and experience love for a second time was really beautiful and a wonderful, wonderful storyline. I will say that out of the Bridgerton books in order, The Duke and I was probably my favorite, followed by Francesca's story, followed by Penelope's story, followed by Eloise's story, followed by Gregory's story, then Hyacinth's, then Antony, and then Benedict, the least favorite. But I would say Francesca's book was definitely one of my top favorites. I really, really enjoyed this one, and I would definitely recommend to anyone who wants to read. This was probably one of my 5-star reads in this series. Then we have Hyacinth's story, which of course is a lot of fun, and I love the fact that it has the diamonds on the cover because she and Gareth are obviously looking out for the diamonds that may be left behind in his home. Again, beautiful, beautiful cover to this book. Just love, love, love that spine. And I apologize for the lighting. I know it's not the absolute best, but I do think that in general, this book was also very wonderful, solid 4-star read for me. Thoroughly, thoroughly enjoyed it and would recommend to anyone who's looking for that regional romance. I think it's also really nice because these characters are very strong female and male lead characters, and every single book has a very strong female character protagonist as well, going through different phases of their life, set in this time period where men were kind of the ones that dictated society. If you will, a lot of these women were pre-suffrage characters. And so it was really interesting to see Julia Quinn kind of giving a take on those females' voices, what it would have meant for the generation of women prior to the women that created the suffrage movement, what it would have meant for them to kind of rebel against the norms of society and take matters into their old hands. And I really, really enjoyed that aspect of all the Bridgerton novels. And then, of course, last but not least, we have On the Way to the Wedding. And again, absolutely adored this book. Really love Lucinda's character. Really love Hermione as well. Love Gregory as well. I think the way the story was written and dictated was very beautiful. I think the prose was very beautiful. I will say this was the more far-fetched one for me of the lot. But again, love, love, love these covers, and I love the fact that it shows Gregory on the spine as well. So altogether, these books are just so stunning, and they make the Bridgerton house together, which is just so nice. Now, I don't have Daphne's book in this collection here with me right now, so I will just ask you to imagine her book. It's a pink spine, but I do absolutely love. Ooh, oh, they make a mess here. I just love how beautiful these books look together. Like, isn't that just gorgeous? You can see Gregory. You can see, of course, so Antony. Then we have Benedict, Colin, Eloise, Francesca, Hyacinth, and Gregory, which was absolutely enjoyable. And of course, the first book in the series would have been Daphne's story. So thank you so much for joining me today as we talk about the Bridgerton series. I hope you guys love and enjoy it just as much as I do. I'm very, very excited to watch this season with Penelope and Colin. Again, I apologize for the lighting today. I have seen the first 2 seasons of Bridgerton, and I'm really excited to read the rest. And I'm just so thankful to Julia Quinn for her wonderful generosity in signing all of my books and spending time and actually talking to us. And if you guys have hung out this long, keep hanging on, because I have exclusive clips of the interviews that were conducted with Julia Quinn and our time at the library when we got to meet her for the signing. So I hope you enjoy this little additional clip as well. And without further ado, let's meet Miss Quinn. Take care.
You can tell it's me. My voice is still there. Yeah.
It's interesting that your voice was developed even then, and you
Yes,
just
it's
grown.
clearly me. It's clearly me.
So interesting. Well, we're going to get into that more, and we're going to talk about the show a little bit more. But I wanted to ask if you think the Netflix series has changed anything about the general perception of the romance genre, given its massive juggernaut.
You know, I'm not sure, because I think that the general perception of the romance novel was changing anyway. And interestingly enough, the big change has been with contemporary romance, not historical romance. I thought the show was going to bring historical romance more into vogue. It has done wonders for my books, and so thank you. But I think, I haven't seen it bleeding over into other historical romances as much as I wish, because there are wonderful, wonderful historical romances out there. But what has been growing, like exponentially, has been contemporary romance, and now, of course, romantasy, which is this big thing as well. So I'm not sure that the show, I think it is contributing, right, but I'm not sure it's the only thing. Yeah.
I want to ask you about that historical romance period. It's always been an interesting tension for me, because on one hand, women at that time, during the historical romance time, especially, historical romance in general, they had no legal, political, or monetary agency, and yet they could have a certain soft power, a certain relational power. I'm just wondering, is that the kind of tension that's interesting to write into for you when you're writing historical romance?
It is, and the Regency is an interesting time period, because it's a little bit too soon for the women in my books to be really pushing the envelope. A few women did, but for example, we're still pretty far away from universal suffrage. We're still pretty far away from women being able to study at universities. So, if I were to jump 50, 60 years in the future, I could have, Eloise, for example, could be really actively trying to get into a university.
Yeah.
Now it's a little too soon, so it's kind of fun for me to write about the women who are paving the way for the generation of women that are going to be able to finally break through the wall. So I like to think that my characters are out there removing bricks so that the women who come after them can knock down the wall. And I enjoy doing that, because I think it's really important to tell the stories of women who are great and strong and wonderful, but not necessarily what history would deem extraordinary. And we've all seen the quote saying, ordinary women or well-behaved women rarely make history. It's true, but if you think about it, the only women who were able to make history back then were the truly extraordinary ones, who had to break every boundary and break every rule. And I think it's wonderful to learn about these women and to admire these women, but that leaves a lot of women without a light shining on them. And there are a lot of women who just quietly and powerfully stretch the boundaries and work to make the world a better place. And I think it's important to tell their stories too.
Absolutely. Amen to that. Just a side note, I write memoir, and I teach memoir a lot. And part of the love I have for that is the telling of stories that have historically never been told, the everyday quotidian lives that make the huge difference in the societal web.
Yeah, and I feel like, again, even with men's history too, which is more commonly just known as history, most of it is about the extraordinary men who did crazy things, but there's also a lot out there about the men who did cool stuff, but maybe not extraordinary. So, we need to get more of the women's stories out there too, and also to remind everybody here that you don't have to be the woman who's going to invent the next vaccine to be worthy of having your story told.
I love that.
Although if you are working on the next great vaccine, I really appreciate you. And I think everybody needs to support you, and if you have a partner in your life, I think your partner should give up his or her work and just support you.
Can we get that in writing, please? Speaking of societal power and women, the invention of Lady Whistledown, for me, is a stroke of literary genius as a narrative technique. Can you talk about developing that? And did you really have no idea who it was when you started writing her?
Yeah, so I actually remember this. It's funny, I get asked a lot about the writing of the Bridgerton series now. People ask me very specific questions. I'm like, I don't remember. I realized that the first book of the series, The Duke and I would have written that in 1998. To give you an idea, when The Duke and I came out, I was pregnant with my older child, and she's going to graduate school next year. So that just gives you an idea like how long it's been. But I do remember Lady Whistledown, exactly how that came about. So first you have to understand there's something that in sort of writers' vernacular called the info dump. And that is when you're starting a book and you've got all this expository information you need to get out there. And you're just like, how do I do this in a way that's not clunky? And the info dump is when it becomes pretty clunky. And so, I mean, how many times have you guys read a book where you've got these two characters talking and they're saying something like, oh my gosh, wasn't it terrible when Mom and Dad died in that crash and we had to go live with Great Aunt Gladys? Oh yes, and we were so scared. And if you're looking at it, it's like they would never have this conversation because they both know all this stuff. It's not natural. And so I'm starting out this book and I've got Daphne and Violet talking, and I'm like, oh, how do I let the reader know that they've got, there's 7 other Bridgertons, and the father has passed away, and they're named alphabetically, and this is like how they're viewed by society, and all these things. And then it occurred to me that if you have a gossip columnist, it is her literal job to dump info. So you can put all the information in a column, and it's not clunky because, again, literal job to do this, and you can do it in kind of this arch, wonderful way. And it just, honestly, it was kind of like, I wouldn't say author's laziness, but I was like, this is brilliant. How come nobody else has done this before? This is like such a great way to do this. And so that's how she came about. And then once I wrote that column, it just kind of made sense. They were kind of talking about, well, who is it? And then I realized I didn't know. And about when I got to the end of the book, I figured out who I wanted it to be. And I think everybody knows now. Is there anybody who doesn't know who Lady Whistledown is? Oh, somebody's raising their hands! Oh my God. See, it used to be, like when it was just the books, there were still a lot of people who were, if they were going in the series, and I had to be careful because there were people, but I feel like everybody knows now. So I'll try to be circumspect, but we all know what I'm talking about. So I got to the end and I decided who I wanted it to be, and then I went back to the beginning and frantically made sure I hadn't done anything to make it impossible, like hadn't put her in the wrong place.
And so you had.
I hadn't actually, but actually this particular character doesn't appear a ton in that first book anyway.
Right.
She's there, but she's not there a ton, so we were good. But I did have to make sure. And then after that, she's actually not revealed until book 4 of the series. So in the writings of book 2 and 3, and then part of 4, I was very careful. I always had to make sure that Lady Whistledown was in the right place to actually have come across the information that she was reporting on.
I have to say, as I was reading the book, I was hearing it in Julie Andrews' voice. Which is not a bad thing.
No, that's a wonderful thing. One of my favorite things, we're giving it away now, is that Nicola Coughlan, the actress who plays Penelope, says that she job shares with Julie Andrews. She's so funny, she's like, we make it work.
Leave it to the Irish. So in the premium magazine that I edit for the Orange County Register, a couple years ago we ran a piece on the power and persuasion, I guess, of Romancelandia, which is the term used in publishing. You guys know what Romancelandia is, right? And it was written by a romance novel agent, and her name's Jessica Watterson, and she wrote, and I just have to read this to you. I think you guys are all gonna love it. She wrote, ultimately romance is about having your cake, eating your cake, enjoying your cake, and saying, I deserve this cake. All at the same time.
Yeah, pretty much. And I saw a few people look confused about Romancelandia. That's just sort of the term for the online community that loves romance novels and likes to talk about them in various social media places.
Yes. I just wondered what you thought about the idea of essentially she's talking about female empowerment at the end of the day.
Yeah, well, there are books where, well, in general, the women now, it's also gay romance, so there may be some without women in it, but it's where the main characters always win.
Yeah.
They always win, and they have a happy ending. And the other thing is that they're generally, even if you are reading something that's got like a dragon or a werewolf or something, they're centered on themes that are familiar to all of us. It's about trying to find love in your life, which is what most human beings are searching for.
Right.
I mean, there are some who aren't, and that's fine if that's what you want, but most human beings as adults are looking for a partner in life and looking for a romantic partner. And so it is quite realistic. It cracks me up when people say, oh, romances aren't realistic. I'm like, aren't you reading like a mystery? Like, how many dead bodies have you turned up in this tiny little town in Maine? Like, why would anybody move there? The murder rate is incredible. Yeah, so.
As if it's not enough to want joy in your story. Yeah. Just a side note. Years ago, my mom was unfortunately dying in the ICU, and I had seen, for 7 days, I had seen the same nurse, just one of those tough, really could do anything in the world nurses. And I'd seen her there day after day. I took a break to go down to the cafeteria, and I saw that hard-boiled nurse reading a romance novel. And I thought, and I got it. It's like, if anyone deserves joy and empowerment, it's this woman who's saving lives day in and day out. Anyway, can we talk about sex a little?
My mother's young.
Okay. Mom, I'll keep it clean. All right.
She was a school nurse, so we're thinking right.
It occurred to me as I was reading the books in preparation for our talk, how great you are at this technique on the page, right? We know the show. 3 words, regency page. But the technique that it's really wonderful from a writing perspective. It's female-centered, and it's also as if it's the way we wish our partners would think about us.
My husband is also in
Okay, sorry. Let's just be academic about this and talk about female-centered, right? Well, however you want to spin. You went to Harvard.
Well, first of all, what's interesting is I'm not actually known for especially spicy books. There are way more, if you're reading romance, I'm really kind of in the middle, I think. I'm not known for the super sexy books. But for me as a writer, if you're going to include an intimate scene, it has to be there for a reason other than just to include an intimate scene.
Right.
And I was thinking about this once because I've read books where they're closed-door romances, and I felt like something was missing. And I was like, oh, that didn't feel right. And then I've also read books where I just ended up sort of flipping the pages during the sex scenes because I'm like, God, this is going on forever. Or it just wasn't interesting. And so I'm like, what's the, it seems like a contradiction. Why are both these things true? And I realized that, again, the scene has to be there for a purpose other than just to have a sex scene in the book. And so I always make sure it's there to either deepen the characterization in some way, or to move the plot along in some way, and usually by saying move the plot along in terms of just the relationship between the people. And so that's probably why, like, in my scenes, you'll actually have people are talking a fair amount. Because I feel like you have to kind of move things along. You have to be moving along the relationship and the story in a way. So it's, yeah.
As always, thank you so much for joining me. Please consider subscribing if you do enjoy anything bookish. I put out videos every Sunday and Wednesday. Would love to have you join us on a regular basis. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and that notification bell, and I look forward to seeing you guys soon. So definitely, definitely join our bookish community if that's something you're interested in. And thank you so much for joining me as always. Have a lovely rest of your weekend wherever you are, and I'll see you next time. Bye, guys.